Empire itself.
Oh, wow. So he is literally using their own language against them.
Precisely, because if Vane rejects that ledger out of hand without any actual proof of forgery, he is rejecting the Empire's own accounting system.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Yeah, he would be dismantling the very illusion of civilized law he is supposedly there to represent. Lucian completely takes away their primary excuse for intervention.
You know, the analogy that immediately came to mind here for me is a hostile corporate takeover.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, imagine these aggressive corporate auditors show up at a subsidiary company completely unannounced, right? They fully expect to find massive embezzlement so they can just fire the CEO and liquidate the asset.
Right, they're out for blood.
Exactly. So they kick open the door, and the CEO just smiles and hands them the most flawlessly organized, impossibly profitable, transparent tax return in the history of the company.
It completely paralyzes the attacker. I mean, they are armed with swords, metaphorically speaking, and they are suddenly forced to fight a war of arithmetic.
Yes, you can't fire someone for being too good at the rules you supposedly enforce. It completely strips the attacker of their moral and legal cover.
It really does.
And Lucian doesn't just, defend himself and leave it there. He actually pivots straight to the offensive.
Oh, this part is great.
Right. He commands the inspector to take that ledger back to the Capitol and remind them that Asagrim is the only thing standing between the soft interior of the Empire and the absolute horrors of the snowfield.
It is just a profound assertion of indispensability. He is essentially reminding the Capitol that they rely on him to keep the wolves away from their door.
But, as we know, Lucian survived the public accusation. But a predator who's denied a public kill will always look for a private technicality. Since Vane couldn't win on the macro level in front of a big audience, he immediately pivots to the micro level. He goes hunting for a flaw in the logistics. And that moves us right into the events of the next chapter in the records. So we are moving on to chapter 153. The report becomes a battlefield.
And now we find ourselves in the map room. Vane is scouring the deployment charts. I mean, he is digging furiously through all these logistics ledgers.
Yeah, because the Capitol didn't send him all this way to verify that Lucian was doing a great job, right? They send him to find a vulnerability.
Exactly. And Vane thinks he finally finds it in the supply lines that are flowing to the northern barricades.
Ah, right, the salted meat and the grain.
Right. He looks at the sheer volume of food being sent to these snowfield immigrants, and then he sees that these laborers are supposedly armed with spears.
Yeah.
So he points right at the map and accuses Lucian of secretly supplying a standing army just under the guise of a labor camp.
And this is where we really have to look at the mechanics of how Lucian defends his data. Because he doesn't argue the numbers at all.
Right. He doesn't deny the amounts.
No, he contextualizes them through the environmental reality. He points out just basic human biology. Like, a freezing immigrant simply cannot swing a pickaxe if they're starving.
Yeah, he mentions that the freezing wind of the north burns through flesh faster than steel.
Exactly.
Okay.
He calmly explains that these laborers need high food rations just to generate the body heat required to survive, let alone do hard physical labor.
And what about the spears?
Well, he says they need the spears to fight off packs of starving timber wolves while they cut wood. Which makes perfect sense.
It does. And what's actually happening here is a fundamental ideological clash.
How do you mean?
Well, Vane looks at the snowfield immigrants and he just sees savages. He sees a threat to imperial order. But Lucian looks at those exact same people and he sees muscle, bone, and loyalty.
Wow.
Yeah, Lucian is taking a desperate, marginalized population and giving them structure. He gives them a purpose.
Yeah.
And crucially, he gives them a shared enemy, the brutal environment itself, to ensure their loyalty to him.
If you're listening to this and you have ever had like a micromanager breathing down your neck, trying to find a tiny mistake in your work from the comfort of a warm office, when they have absolutely no idea what it takes to actually do your job on the ground.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Well, this next scene is exactly how you disarm that kind of person.
Yes. Tell him how he does it.
Okay, so Lucian invites Vane to go and stand a single watch at the northern barricades. He literally tells the inspector to go out there that very night, stand in the freezing cold, and do it on the half rations that Vane believes are supposedly appropriate.
It is such a brilliant tactical maneuver because he isn't just explaining the rations anymore. He is publicly exposing the inspector's complete ignorance.
It's just this polite yet completely devastating way of saying you have absolutely no idea what it takes to survive out here.
Right.
And, of course, predictably, Vane just stiffens up and declines the invitation. He refuses to step into the raw reality of the very people he is trying to condemn.
No.
But I did notice something else in this scene that I wanted to ask you about. The text mentions that the local territorial officials are standing in the room just completely silent, watching this entire exchange happen. Why is that specific detail so important?
That's a great catch. It's important because Lucian is controlling the narrative, not just for Vane, but for his own people.
Oh, he's putting on a masterclass for them.
Exactly. Controlling your own data narrative is the ultimate key takeaway from this map room standoff. Because Vane tries to use Lucian's data against him, right? But Lucian recontextualizes it in real time.
Right.
He shows his officials that you do not fight imperial pressure by groveling, and you don't fight it by drawing swords. You fight it with an undeniable competence and a total mastery of your own reality.
That's so powerful. But Ving starts to get desperate here. He realizes he is losing the argument in front of an audience, so he asks this really pointed question.
Yeah, he goes for the throat.
He does. He asks, what stops these armed immigrants from taking those wolf hunting spears and turning them on Capitol tomorrow?
And Lucian delivers a line that just asserts ultimate leverage. He simply looks at him and says, I stop them.
It is chilling. But I have a major issue here, looking at it practically.
What's that?
Well, winning an argument in a map room is super satisfying, obviously, but it doesn't stop a courier's horse. Vane still gets to leave. He is a creature of the Capitol. He's going to write a report, and he's absolutely going to lie. So how do you stop a lie once it's already sealed in wax and in motion?
And that is the exact friction point we reach in the next part of the records. So we're moving into chapter 154, the invisible web.
Right.
This is where his strategy has to evolve from just a static defense into an active, invisible web. The setting completely shifts here to Lucian's private solar.
Here, for those listening who might not know the architectural term, a solar is essentially a lord's private fortified inner chamber. It's where the public performance finally stops and the real plotting begins.
Exactly.
And the atmosphere described here is so tense. You have this iron wrought brazier just crackling, throwing these long, dramatic shadows all across the room. And Lucian is just sitting there, slowly swirling a chalice of dark winter wine.
It's very cinematic. And into this room slips a spy named Ilian. Now, the text makes a real point to describe Ilian not as some, assassin in black leather, but as a completely forgettable grain merchant.
I honestly love that detail because it shows that Lucian's intelligence network is deeply embedded in trade and logistics, not just guys creeping around in the shadows with daggers.
Exactly. It's practical intelligence. And Alien brings a forged copy of the dispatch that Vane is currently sending back to the Capitol.
And just as you'd predict, Vane lied.
Oh, completely. The dispatch ignores those flawless ledgers entirely. It is just full of inflammatory buzzwords like militarization and barbarian threat.
So frustrating.
It is a document entirely designed to frame Azagrim for treason, totally regardless of the actual facts on the ground.
Which really proves that the Capitol's intention was never an objective audit to begin with. The conclusion was written before Vane even arrived.
Precise.
Now, if I am a falsely accused border lord in this situation, my immediate instinct is to write a frantic, desperate letter directly to the Emperor. I want to get my defense on the record right. I want to say, no, wait, the inspector is lying. Look at the ledgers.
Right, and that is the conventional response. You play defense, you try to fight the battle in the political arena, which, by the way, is exactly where the Capitol wants you to fight.
Oh, right, because they have home field advantage.
Exactly. In a political war, the Capitol holds all the cards, the courts, the laws, the Emperor's ear. They will win that fight every time. But Lucian completely refuses to fight there.
He and Felicia, his aide, they do something entirely different. They bring out this tall stack of wax-sealed envelopes, and they send letters not to politicians, but to the merchant guilds in the lower rings of the empire.
Yeah.
They completely halt all timber and iron trade flowing out of Azagrim. Just put it off. And they blame the stoppage entirely on Inspector Vane's quote-unquote imperial security concerns.
It is asymmetric warfare in its purest form. He drags the Capitol out of the political arena where they are strong and throws them into an economic crisis where he holds the monopoly on the resources they desperately need to survive the coming winter.
Okay, but I have to challenge this strategy, though.
Sure.
Because if you are a border territory and you unilaterally cut off the Capitol's supply chain of vital raw materials right before the dead of winter, Isn't that literally an act of war?
I see what you're saying.
Aren't you basically just begging them to march an army up there immediately to take the iron by force?
Well, if he simply declared an embargo out of defiance, yes, it would be an act of open rebellion. But we have to look really closely at the mechanics of plausible deniability here.
Go.
Lucian doesn't frame this as an embargo against the capital. He frames it as total compliance. He Wayneizes the inspector's own paranoia. That is the strategic masterstroke. He is officially communicating to the merchant guilds. Look, the esteemed Imperial Inspector has pointed out grave security concerns regarding our supply lines. So, as a loyal servant of the Empire, I am sadly forced to shut everything down to ensure absolute safety until this audit is fully resolved.
Okay, I see it now. Wow. Because he frames it as strict adherence to the capital's own investigation, an immediate military attack by the Emperor wouldn't look like putting down a rebellion.
No, it would look like imperial tyranny.
Right.
It would look like the capital attacking a loyal lord who is literally just following their orders. And more importantly than that, it would completely enrage the merchant class.
Let's talk about the economic mechanics of this, actually, because I think it is arguably the most fascinating part of the whole story. How does stopping timber in a frozen frontier actually threaten a massive capital city that's miles and miles away?
Well, I mean, think about modern supply chain fragility.
Like the microchips.
Exactly. Or look at what happens when a single massive container ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a perfect example.
It isn't just that one boat that suffers. Within days, factories on the totally opposite side of the planet have to halt production because they don't have parts.
Right.
Which means retail stores suddenly have empty shelves, which means investors panic, and the stock market dips. It is a massive domino effect.
So Asgrim is basically the boat stuck in the canal.
Exactly. The entire imperial economy relies on these raw materials. If the iron ore stops flowing, the blacksmiths down in the capital have absolutely nothing to forge.
And if they have nothing to forge, they don't get paid.
Right. If they don't get paid, they strike. If the timber stops, the wealthy lords cannot build their winter fortifications or heat their massive drafty estates.
Wow.
So by halting trade at the source, Lucian creates this localized crisis that just ripples outward, paralyzing the wealthy elites at the very top. He forces the capital to come to the negotiating table because he makes them the villain in their own story.
And there was this one moment in this scene with Hugo, the massive knight we mentioned earlier.
Oh.
He's just standing in the corner. His armor is faintly grinding when he shifts his weight. And he is a man who is built entirely for violence.
Right. He's a soldier.
And he realizes in this moment that he is completely obsolete in this room. He doesn't fully understand all the intricacies of merchant guild contracts, but he understands that his lord is fighting a war with ink and trade routes and anticipation.
Yeah, Lucian is taking control of the economic wind rather than just trying to survive the political storm.
But, a strategy drawn up in a quiet room only matters if it actually impacts the real world. A theoretical chokehold is utterly useless if the target doesn't actually feel their oxygen getting cut off.
Absolutely true.
Which brings us to the immediate fallout. And that leads us to chapter 155, The Weight of the Crown.
And this section of the text, I have to say, is a profound study in contrasting forms of power. The records present this almost cinematic split-screen effect.
Oh, I love how they wrote this part.
Right. We get to see the consequences simultaneously unfolding in the lavish capital and out in the freezing mud of Asagrim.
Let's start in the capital. So the scene opens inside this grand banquet hall of the Silver Keep. We are introduced to two really wealthy aristocrats, Lord Morven and Lord Orsini.
And these are the kinds of men whose wealth and power rely entirely on resource extraction from territories they have never, ever actually visited.
Right. And the historical record uses a very specific, fascinating phrase here. It describes the architecture of the banquet hall as, quote, deceitful.
Yes.
It has these vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of ancient victories that basically force the lords to always look up toward heaven while they are constantly plodding in the mud down below.
It's beautiful imagery. But down at those gilded tables, there is absolute panic setting in.
Yeah, Morven is complaining that the smell of roasted pheasant is literally making his stomach turn. Why? Because that domino effect we just talked about is hitting them incredibly hard.
It's crashing down on them.
Right. Timber prices have doubled in just 3 days. The iron ore shipments haven't arrived at all. The blacksmiths are actively threatening to strike, and the deep winter hasn't even fully set in yet.
And Morven realizes exactly what is happening. He explicitly states to Orsini that Lucian is using the mud and snow of the frontier as a literal noose. and he's tightening it around the neck of the capital.
The economic chokehold is working flawlessly. But explain to me, why are these ultra-wealthy lords so vulnerable to this? I mean, they have mountains of gold, they have standing armies. Why does a pause in timber make them panic like this?
Because their power is entirely abstract.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the capital's power relies entirely on that architectural deceit we talked about. It relies on exploiting others from afar, using pieces of paper to move resources they never actually have to touch with their own hands.
Oh, I see.
They don't know how to chop wood. They don't know how to mine iron ore. So when Lucian cuts off the physical, tangible resources, their entire abstraction collapses.
That makes so much sense.
Right. They can't eat the painted ceilings. They can't heat their manors by burning Inspector Vane's fabricated reports. They are suddenly, for the first time, exposed to the raw elements of survival, and they are terrified.
Which just provides an incredible contrast to what Lucian is doing at that exact same moment. Because while these lords are panicking over roasted pheasant and wine, Lucian is thousands of miles away, ankle-deep in freezing mud.
Yes.
He is out at the newly erected palisades. And for anyone listening who might not know, palisades are essentially massive defensive walls made of sharpened wooden stakes driven deep into the earth.
Right. It's brutal, heavy work.
And he is out there with hundreds of the snowfield immigrants doing the brutal physical labor of driving these stakes into the frozen ground.
And this just perfectly illustrates his fundamental philosophy of power. Lucian's power does not rely on deceit or distance. It relies on proximity, it relies on shared suffering, and it relies on mutual respect.
Yeah.
He tells his knight, Hugo, that the capital is going to get desperate soon. He knows that fear makes men reckless.
Yeah.
When the spring thaw finally comes, the capital won't just send an inspector with a ledger anymore. They will send an army. So they have to dig the trenches faster.
But the key here is he doesn't just stand on a hill in a warm cloak and yell at them to dig faster. There is this incredibly stark moment recorded in the text. Lucian stops in front of a young snowfield boy who's just really struggling to carry a heavy basket of rocks for the defensive line.
Now, a typical lord in this era would either call a guard over to help or, more likely, just completely ignore the boy.
Right. But Lucian reaches out with his own leather gauntlet. He hoists the heavy basket himself. He carries it to the edge of the palisade, and he drops it right into the line.
Yeah.
He doesn't make a grand speech. He doesn't look around to make sure people are clapping for him. He just gives the boy a curt nod and keeps walking.
And that single action is honestly worth more than 1,000 political speeches.
Absolutely.
The records state that right after he did that, the rhythm of the pickaxes literally changed across the entire line. The sound grew heavier, more deliberate. It was the sound of loyalty hardening into something completely unbreakable.
It is the ultimate test of leadership, isn't it? He is leading from the front. And you can tell it is not a PR stunt. There are no cameras out there on the freezing frontier. Yeah. It is the raw forging of loyalty through shared physical hardship.
And this brings us to a core philosophical difference that the sources highlight. The record states this amazing line: fear could force a man to dig a trench, but only respect could make a man hold that trench when the enemy charged.
Wow. That is a phenomenal line.
It really is, and it explains the entire dynamic of the conflict. The capital operates strictly on fear. They sent Inspector Vane to instill fear. They will eventually send an army to instill fear.
Right.
But Lucian is building a foundation of respect because he knows that when that Imperial army finally arrives, flawless paperwork won't hold the defensive line. Only the people standing in those trenches will.
This all culminates in a really tense final scene. Lucian returns from the mud back to the map room. His aide, Felicia, is waiting for him. And she looks exhausted. She has dark circles under her eyes. Her fingers are stained with ink from forging all those documents.
Yeah.
And she hands him a decrypted letter that they intercepted from the capital. It shows that the Western lords, the very same men we saw panicking at the banquet, have petitioned the emperor directly.
And what are they demanding in this petition?
They are demanding that Asegrim be brought under direct imperial administration. They want the emperors to just take the territory away from Lucian entirely to restore their resources.
Right, because they want to bypass the legal audit entirely, because the audit failed.
Yep.
The ledger proved Lucian's competence, and the economic chokehold proved his leverage. So they just want to abandon the pretense of law entirely and exert raw imperial ownership.
And Lucian's response to this is just a masterstroke of realistic political philosophy. He crushes the parchment in his fist and says, "Power invites judgment, but weakness invites ownership. I will not be owned."
Weakness invites ownership.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, that is the absolute core of this entire historical account.
It really applies to absolutely everything, doesn't it?
It really does. If you extrapolate this to any modern scenario, whether it's, a corporate merger or diplomatic negotiations between nations, or honestly, even establishing personal boundaries in your own life, if you project vulnerability without a defense, larger entities will inherently attempt to absorb or control you.
Because nature abhors a vacuum,
Hmm.
and power abhors a weakness.
Precisely. The capital initially thought Asagrim was weak. They thought it was this chaotic, unmanaged frontier they could easily step in, condemn, and just own. But Lucian proved they were formidable.
He really did.
He didn't just survive the audit, he made the capital realize that trying to own Asagrim would cost them vastly more than they could ever afford to pay.
It is incredible how a single leader turned the massive, lumbering weight of an empire against itself. He didn't try to, stand in front of the boulder rolling down the hill. He just dug a trench, redirected the momentum, and let it roll into a pit of its own making.
Yeah. By weaponizing structure through those ledgers, he totally removed their legal justification. By controlling the logistics and the supply chains, he removed their economic leverage. And by sharing the suffering in the freezing mud, he ensured that if it ever did come to a physical fight, his people would actually stand their ground.
Pulling all of this together from these 4 chapters, the overarching takeaways for you listening are incredibly potent. When you are faced with an overwhelming force that wants to destroy or absorb you, do not play their game.
Never.
If they want emotional anger, give them impenetrable paperwork. If they want a political shouting match in a courtroom, give them a quiet, devastating economic chokehold. Weaponize your own structure and competence so flawlessly that their attacks just slide right off you.
And most importantly, I think, build your loyalty in the mud with the people doing the actual work, not up in the banquet halls with the people merely talking about the work.
That's such a good point.
Because whether you are navigating a complex corporate hierarchy, or defending a major project from unfair executive scrutiny, or managing a crisis in your community, you have to remember that weakness invites ownership. Building an undeniable, documented record of competence is the best armor against unjust scrutiny.
Yeah.
Creating a system where your value is visibly indispensable is how you prevent a larger entity from simply taking your autonomy away.
Well said. I want to leave you with one final image to mull over, building on everything we have unpacked today. Look at your own environment, your own company, your own organization. If a crisis completely cut off all systems of trade, communication, and supply tomorrow, who would actually hold the true power in your world?
That's a heavy question.
Would it be the people sitting in the comfortable boardrooms endlessly debating policy? Or would it be the people standing out in the freezing mud who actually know how to build the walls?
It really forces you to question where true leverage actually lives.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning the structures around you, and go build your own impenetrable defenses. We will catch you on the next